Hi everyone, and welcome to episode number 7 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we are going to talk about high carbohydrate refeed days. Now this again is one of those grey areas in the fitness industry. I believe in certain contexts it can be a very useful tool. So for example, someone who's been dieting for an extended period of time, coupled with the fact they're also very lean, so under 15% body fat. However, there seems to be a trend at the moment in the fitness industry where this random carb cycling approach seems to be used a lot. You already have large amounts of body fat and not really in a position where the high carbohydrate refeed is necessary. And for that individual, more of a linear energy deficit, slowly tapering calories and or increase expenditure is the best tool and the most efficient and effective simple protocol to follow. Now first we need to understand what the purpose of the refeed is. So for those of you who aren't aware of what a high carbohydrate refeed day is, essentially the goal is to negate some of the negative effects of dieting. So for example, a hormone called leptin in particular drops significantly when dieting, and this can really slow progress to a degree. So therefore having a day when an individual is very lean to essentially raise this hormone and then go back to dieting can certainly have some positive effects. Another great tool, it can replenish glycogen. Those of you who have goals of maintaining as much muscle mass as possible, you'll know when you go into a dieting phase that sometimes your strength starts to decrease, and by having a day or days during the week where you increase carbohydrates just for one day, you can replenish glycogen, performance in the gym can go up slightly, and then you can then return to the dieting phase once again. Also, it can really help with just the psychological aspect of dieting when you've been doing it for an extended period of time, added to the fact you're already very lean. It can really give you a psychological break, almost feel like just for one day of the week or 2 days a week that you're not actually dieting, and therefore can regain some motivation when you then return to dieting calories. Also, it just can really help with adherence. So if you've been dieting for an extended period of time, having some higher carbohydrate refeed days, almost a little bit like what I just mentioned there with the psychological benefits, it can just really help reignite motivation because you feel a little bit better, you feel a little bit better in the gym, and then you can return to the dieting phase. It can also potentially have a small increase in your metabolic rate. The evidence of this is somewhat of a grey area. However, in my opinion, it can still be a useful tool even if it doesn't increase the metabolic rate that significantly. So again, who is this going to be used for? So as I mentioned in the opening of the podcast, this is mainly for someone who's been in an extended fat loss phase, coupled with the fact they're already very lean, so under 15% body fat for males. And the reason being, these physiological changes, these negative adaptations during a dieting phase, they really do increase exponentially when an individual is much leaner, when they've been dieting for an extended period of time. Therefore, the refeed day is much more beneficial for this individual. Conversely, someone with a lot more body fat to lose, they essentially still have that stored energy available, i.e. the body fat, to use, and therefore the physiological adaptations aren't quite as severe. Therefore, like I mentioned, it's more for an individual that's under 15% body fat and has been dieting for an extended period of time. So how do you use the high carbohydrate refeed day? Again, this is very much a grey area, but at the same time some very good ballpark figures are to bring your carbohydrate intake back to maintenance carbohydrate figures or even slightly above that. That's a very good starting point to work from. Now with regards to protein and fat, I like to keep both of these constant. You'll get some practitioners who like to keep protein the same and they'll actually drop fat slightly so the total calories doesn't go too far to the extreme. You could potentially do this, however, I've experimented both with my clients and myself and the differences aren't really that significant, and I like to keep it simple, just keep protein and fat the same and just manipulate carbohydrates. Now, what day should you be using this high carbohydrate refeed day? Again, this really depends, and some people like to have this on a non-training day. However, for the most part, I actually like to put it on a training day, and usually this will go on a day where energy expenditure is going to be higher. So for example, a lower body leg day could be a good day to use this, or even a day where an individual's working some of their weaker body parts and we're really trying to maintain as much gym performance as possible in those weaker areas. That could be another day you can use. The point is though, just use it. Once you're under 15% body fat, you've been dieting for 8 to 12 weeks or anything longer than that, you're going to need probably a refeed every week or so. Now, how frequently should you be using this? Now, again, this isn't a black and white answer, and it really depends. Like I mentioned just a second ago, once a week is usually a good starting point. If you've just come into the 15% body fat range, probably every other week would be a very good time to use this. And as you get leaner and leaner, say you're sub 10% body fat, you may need refeeds twice a week, even 3 times a week. Now, this really depends, and it's very difficult for me to give some generic figure here, so it really depends on the client. But I'd say once you're under that 15% body fat, every other week, every week, you're going to have to experiment with this. Would be a very good starting point to work from. Now, what's the difference between high carbohydrate refeed days and just traditional carbohydrate cycling? So those of you who are unaware of carbohydrate cycling, this is essentially where you have a different carbohydrate target for a different day of the week. Now, there's a couple of different models here. Some people like to use the traditional non-linear, so you have high carbohydrates on training days and then lower carbohydrates on non-training days. There's nothing really wrong with this, but as I mentioned on some of my previous podcasts, we're talking about the context of mainly weight training and a small amount of cardio. Therefore, the amount of calories burned from training days to non-training days, it isn't, even though it's going to be greater, it's not like you're an endurance trainee training twice a day where using a non-linear approach is almost the protocol by default, in the sense you must have significantly higher carbohydrates on those training days compared to non-training days. However, for most individuals, I don't see it as a necessary requirement. Having said that, that's not to say you couldn't use it. If you prefer to have higher carbohydrates training days versus non-training days, you could still use it. Just remember that goal of creating that net energy deficit over a chronic period of time. The other option is I've seen where people have a very high day, a medium day, and then a low day. Again, this for the most part I don't see as necessary, especially when, again, it really depends on the context of the individual. This could be a useful tool for someone who's very lean, but the biggest difference between using refeed days and carb cycling, in my opinion, we're essentially using the refeed days when we actually need them, rather than just a random shotgun approach of just going high, medium, low, when potentially we could just use a linear approach, same calories on every single day, same macronutrients, measure progress, try and eke out as much progress as possible on those, make manipulations, and then when we get leaner, we've been dieting for longer, then we can add a refeed day when we need to. Whereas doing a high day, a medium day, and a low day, and different variations of this, I don't see as necessary for most individuals. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't use it, but in my opinion, just overcomplicates things. That's the biggest difference, in my opinion. The refeed days, we're using them actually when we need to, whereas carb cycling, for the most part, is a random attack. So, conclusions, applications. It's important to note that the refeed day isn't something magic. It's important to also note that you can still make some excellent progress just using a linear approach, e.g. calories, macronutrients, the same every day, create that net energy deficit, make manipulations to either decrease in calories and or increase in expenditure through cardio. You can still make some very good progress using that model, and it isn't even 100% necessary for when you're leaner, but it is certainly a very useful tool to have at your disposal once you're under 15% body fat. Again, just as I said above, focus on the basics, make sure you're actually creating that net energy deficit at the end of the week. That's still the number one goal. You're tracking your calories, you're tracking your macronutrients, you're tracking your training, and only use this if and when necessary. As I mentioned above, you're going to just bring carbohydrates to maintenance calories or slightly above. As you become leaner, the frequency of this carbohydrate refeed day may be more necessary. So as you come under 15% body fat, once every other week, once every week should be a good guideline, and then when you get under 10%, you may need a refeed day twice a week. But again, these are very subjective figures, and you can't really give a broad recommendation without seeing the full context of the individual. Like I said, it always comes back to the context. The client comes first. It really depends every single time. But hopefully you've taken some great advice from this. Like I said, if you're not under 15% body fat, this really isn't necessary for you. Just focus on the fundamentals, focus on the energy deficit. However, if you're under 15% body fat, perhaps you've hit a fat loss plateau and you're looking to bust through that, this can be a very useful tool for you. So thank you very much for listening. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page called free ebook. If you click on that, you can download that immediately. And I basically teach you how to set calories, set macronutrients, and also teach you how to make manipulations to move you close to your fat loss or muscle gain goals. I also do online coaching, however I'm very close to being fully booked. So if this is of interest to you, I suggest you contact me. If you go to my website and you go on service, you'll see how the online coaching works. However, within the next week or so, I do suspect to be fully booked, and then I'll have a waiting list. The other option you have, I also have a Inner Circle membership site where essentially I'm teaching you what to do, but without me being there and actually telling you the actual individual steps to take for you personally. Essentially, I'm giving you all the pieces to the puzzle, how to track macronutrients, how to set calories, some generic training programs, how to make changes to move you close to your goals. But it's not the same as the online coaching, where it's actually me monitoring your progress and then me making the manipulations. But that could be another option for you. So that is of interest. If that interests you, visit jameslaytonfitness.co.uk, Layton. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I'll look forward to speaking to you next week.